Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see that the room has filled up. This is a kind of an experiment. You probably have noticed that rarely has there been such a serious topic on offer as this one, and it's really reassuring to see that people are interested enough to wake up after long nights spent at the Kunsthalle and wherever else you were. I always start by thanking Art Basel for obvious reasons, but I think it's really a great thing that this largest platform for art in the world also incorporates opportunities to talk about serious issues that affect us all. And thank you, Mari, and thank you, Jessica Burgos, for making it all happen. I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to have to sort of speak a little bit more than usual in advance of the people that you really came here to listen to, because I thought it might be helpful to give you some overview of what we're talking about. But you all know that we're here to talk about the migrant crisis, which is undoubtedly the most urgent social, economic, and political story of our time. It has already left a lasting impact, certainly on all of Europe, although now in the United States where I live, increasingly public discourse is being affected by it. It's already having a profound impact on the European project, a proposition that is being tested in a few days in London. It's a huge story. But in addition to being a political and economic and social story, and human story, it is a cultural story. It is a story that is reverberating in our world, the art world, and it raises some profound questions. On the one hand, what are the roles and contributions of artists in this situation, both as creators and as citizens? And on the other hand, how can art institutions respond? What is it that art institutions can do, should do, must do in the face of this crisis, using the particular tools and resources that they have at their disposal? So we have a very diverse and engaged group of wonderful people here today who represent sort of different positions on the landscape, and we chose them very carefully because they really bring a very different set of experiences to this conversation. Maya Alkateb-Chami is director of Jusoor, which is an NGO in Philadelphia that works on educational and cultural initiatives for immigrants. So she's here for the United States as well. Paul Hobson, in the middle, is the director of Modern Art Oxford, which is a very well-established, mid-sized art non-profit institution with a very strong dedication to socially conscious work, but also deep engagement with the public. Razan Nassreddine, to my left, who is project director of an initiative at the Museum for Islamische Kunst in Berlin, which you'll hear more about, but which is one of many museum initiatives framed in response to the crisis. And finally, Adrian Paci, an artist based in Milan, originally from Afghani descent, who not only has the experience of being an immigrant, but whose work often reflects on the vicissitudes of dislocation in one way or another. So please give them a round of applause in advance for their wonderful thoughts. So a little bit of context for you. Many of you know this, but I just thought it might be helpful by way of a briefing. This is a truly epic crisis. We've had over 1 million arrivals in Europe in 2015 and more than 200,000 in the first 5 months of this year. There were 1.3 million asylum claims in the EU last year. That, coincidentally, is roughly the population of Brussels. 300,000 of those were approved extremely unevenly across Europe. As you know, most of the immigrants are fleeing war. This is a very global story. Most of them are coming out of Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. A staggering 4.8 million Syrians have fled since the outbreak of conflict in their country. Very tragically, 3,800 people have perished trying to reach Europe just last year. And by the way, this is a worldwide phenomenon, so just so you know, more than 3,000 people have perished across the globe attempting to reach new homes. And then I think what is a particularly sad aspect of this crisis is that 35% of the migrants are children, 20% are women. 7,000 unaccompanied children have crossed this year from Africa to Italy already. That's a 100% increase, and we are just heading into the season of movements. And as you've been reading, rape, sexual abuse, forced prostitution are some of the darker edges of this crisis, alongside some very positive stories, which we'll also share today. I don't want to be completely dark on this subject, but suffice it to say that not since the Second World War have we witnessed dislocation and human difficulties on such an epic scale. Now, artists are beginning to respond, and almost daily you can hear news of new statements, activities, exhibitions. Among those names that everybody in this room will recognize who have responded by making works or protesting or even visiting camps: Kader Attia, Wolfgang Tillmans, William Kentridge, Francis Salis, among many others. Anish Kapoor in London circulated a petition that was signed by pretty much a cross-spectrum of major cultural figures in the UK. Olafur Eliasson has initiated a project called the Green Light Project, which is actually coming here to Basel this weekend, to Messeplatz, where the immigrants are working on these green lights, which are then sold for a certain amount of money. I'm not exactly sure, I think 35 euros, to raise money for immigrant causes. Ai Weiwei, as you know, has visited the island of Lesbos and has done a number of works, some well received, others less so. Here at Art Basel just yesterday, Alfredo Jar spoke very movingly of his project on the same topic, and in fact, as part of Parkour on Münsterplatz, he has volunteers who have created these collection boxes invoking the very image that you probably all remember of the young child on the beach in Turkey, used as a collection box to raise money. Many more. The Walner Gallery here inside the hall has images by Ibi Izzo from Lampedusa in Italy. Just last night, the Kunstraum Rien had a talk by the Hungarian-Syrian artist Rosa El Hassan with the American activist artist Marta Rosler. And at this point, I'd just like to pause for one moment to say I'm Hungarian by birth, and I would just like to register my extreme disappointment with my country of birth for its role last year in this whole crisis. So the list of artists who are responding grows longer each day, but institutions are responding as well. The German Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale, many, many institutions across Europe have organized fundraisers and awareness-raising activities. The Louisiana Museum in Copenhagen, among some that are now offering classes to immigrant children. A lot of activities are in fact around youth, as we'll hear. One of my favorites is at the Staatsmuseum for Kunst in Copenhagen, where they have turned the museum into language school. Turns out a museum is a fantastic place to learn a language, understandably, but they didn't stop there. They then took they took the language students and gave them 6 weeks of employment at the museum. Denmark these days is a surprisingly conservative and closed society, unfortunately. But if you have a resume that says that you worked at one of the most prestigious institutions, you're much more likely to get a job. And in fact, all of them have gotten jobs. Glenn Lowry did a series on CNN on immigrations. Art schools are now offering positions, so on and on and on. Things are beginning to happen. It's been slow, it's been uneven. The situation is new, it's fluid, but the art world is responding. So with that, I'd just like to start pulling in our wonderful guests, and hopefully we can tilt this conversation less in the direction of stating the obvious, which is that this is a really bad situation, but more about what it is that we can do about it. And I thought it would be fitting to start with Adrian, being that he is the artist here. You left, I believe, Albania in 1997 as a refugee to Italy. And your work often deals with dislocation, separation, nostalgia. I think you once said, the fact of being at a crossroads at the frontier of two separate identities underlies all of my work. You were in the Venice Biennale, you're doing a lot of things as an artist, but how has your personal experience of being an immigrant shaped your practice as an artist and your response or your sense of what's going on now in the world?
Thank you. Yes, as you said, you talked about experience, and I like underlining this because I don't like to talk about migration as a topic, as an issue. Mm-hmm. I don't approach migration as an issue. I approach it as an experience. And in that sense, I can say that in my work, that has been very important. Mm-hmm. I mean, personally me, but also my country went through dramatic transformations in the 90s. But also leaving Albania has been another dramatic change. And of course, somehow this experience left some traces also in what I was doing as an artist. And so yeah, I mean, I start being more conscious about the fact that my language, my expression has to somehow deal with what I was living. Mm-hmm. So that also my first video piece came out. I was trained as a painter. Mm-hmm. I was trained as a figurative painter. I did some experience, some experiments with abstract painting, because that was what, after experiencing socialist realism for 50 years in Albania, we all wanted to do, you know, so somehow to get rid of the figurative painting and go toward the abstract, thinking that was the freedom. But then, of course, I mean, the experience in Italy and very, very intimate experience also in somehow with my family members, you know, somehow leaded me to new experience also with art language. But going also back to what you said in the beginning, you know, you showed us, you know, a bit the scene of, and it's quite impressive and dramatic, you know, and to think how art and artists can respond, because I cannot talk as an art a representative of art institutions. I'm here like an artist. I think that the first step maybe to do is to understand also what art cannot do in front. I mean, instead of just thinking what you can do to respond to this situation. Because what I think that the crisis of migration that you described in the beginning doesn't need now, I think it doesn't need more spectacle, you know? So we need
more spectacle.
Yeah,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
We had to avoid, I think, the spectacular use or abuse of the traumatic experience of migration. So somehow I think that art should think about also about its limits, to understand more its own potentialities. Mm-hmm. And instead of thinking just what art can do to respond to migration, I think would be also nice or interesting to see it from the other side and to try to understand what art can get from migration experience. You know, what we can learn. You know, how art can somehow open itself toward a different attitude that is coming from that kind of experience.
And what is the deeper meaning of this in your mind?
Well, I think, yeah, the deeper meaning is like not to see ourselves as somebody who is in a privileged position and then it's looking to somebody else who is unprivileged and that is trying just to help. And of course we can do that, but we can do it without thinking that we are artists. We cannot, I mean, we don't need to go with cameras. We don't need to go with like canvases or papers or pencils. We just can help, I mean, in many ways, like citizens. Mm-hmm. But as an artist, I would like to prefer better an attitude that is trying to learn and trying to see what the immigration experience can teach us. And thinking, for example, like some characteristics that I think that are typical in the experience of migration is, for example, the urgency. You know, all the immigrants have, I mean, experienced this need, this urgent need. And do we experience that in art? Mm-hmm. Or, for example, like the desire. I mean, do we see that kind of desire when we make art? I mean, we in the art world we talk a lot about projects, you know, and I'm a bit bored about that. You know, I'm a bit bored listening all the time, artists thinking about the project. What's your next project? I'm having a project, applying for projects, applying for money. You have all the time to convince people that you have a great idea, and somehow. I mean, the immigrant attitude is not about project. I mean, of course, they leave because they have a dream, they have a desire, but they are able to take a risk and to enter in a kind of adventure. Does art enter in this kind of adventure? Mm-hmm. I mean, are artists now in that kind of attitude, adventurous attitude? I mean, these are some aspects that I was.
So, but what is it that artists have to unlearn to get to this place, both in terms of changing these hierarchies that you talked about and also this kind of acceleration or urgency? What are the things that artists have to sort of unlearn in order to get to that place that you feel is desirable?
Well, of course, it's to get out of the commodities. You know, I mean, I think. I mean, art experienced, it has a tradition somehow of breaking rules. Mm-hmm. You know, all the 20th century has been about breaking rules. You know? And I think it's very important. But now we are like a bit accommodated in this large territory with a lot of disponibilities, you know. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of this, in terms of language, in terms of possibilities, in terms of, I mean, we can do whatever we want somehow, you know. We can do drawing, performance, conceptual art, installations, and trying to think what is the border that we should go further, you know, and which we should break somehow in this large, extreme territory of freedom. Mm-hmm. And I think in that sense, the displacement is not just jumping from in the surface of things from one thing to another, but it's trying to go on depth. And I think that in that sense, the immigration experience with all these, also with the somehow with this sense of trust, you know, because somehow we all talk about the end of things, you know, we are the end of art, the end of painting, and they I think talk more about new beginning, because it's like they are like restarting their life, you know, so they don't have time to think about the end, you know, they are thinking about the new beginning, and this is an energy that we should learn from them. And then the other thing, and the last maybe now, because they are the other people that have to talk, I think is that it's okay that artists go and help and make visible somehow the topics, but somehow we have also to understand that it's not us that have to talk, but they have to talk. I mean, so it's not us that have to make art out of them, but they have somehow to make their art and to articulate their experiences, and why not to articulate them in a way that it can be unpredictable and fresh also for us.
So as we'll see in a minute, I think some of this unlearning will have its counterpart in some of the institutional behaviors as well. So thanks for that. We're gonna go to Razan now, who has, as I mentioned, been working on this project at the Museum for Islamische Kunst. You are Lebanese. You grew up in Damascus, child of Syrian and Lebanese parents, and you moved to Europe to study, which is a perfectly normal path for a young person. You trained in cultural management and intercultural mediation, and then you've joined the museum, and you're one of 19 guides, 18 of whom are Syrian, one is Iraqi. And the project is called Multakas, which means meeting point in Arabic. Started last year, and it's about museums guides, hiring museum guides from these regions. Say a little bit about this experience, but mostly say what it has meant for those taking part, and how it is registered inside the museum.
So, as you say, we started in November 2015, and we just the idea come from the director of Museum for Islamic Art, with another project who's already in the Museum for Islamic Art and called the Syrian Heritage Archive. And in this project, they archive all the destruction and for the monuments and cultural heritage who's destroyed now in Syria. So this both part and because of the largest number of refugees the last summer, as you say before, the museum as an institution was thinking about what can we do, and we recognize that the most Syrian people who comes now, they are young people, and what we can do, and the idea come like that. To be active, to be more near to the people, and not like to be like an institution as a temple and the museum just for luxurious people, you know. And the entrance, it's very also it's not it's expensive. So
you mean the tickets are
the
expensive.
ticket of the museum, yeah. So we make now a guided tour in Arabic for Arabic speakers, and we choose 4 museums who had a relation. Cultural relation with Syria and Iraq. So the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, you have also always the Iraqi Syrian heritage from Babylon 4 Christus, and then you have the Byzantinische Kunst in art in Bode Museum, and the Islamic art also in Museum for Pergamon, and these 3 museums, it's about Syria and Iraq and gross Syria. And the 4th museum is the Museum for German History. So here we can see and we can learn more about the other culture, so the German culture. And at the end, I can say the project is an intercultural project because you learn both sides of both countries, the country who you are from and the new country who you are now. So meeting point, it's exactly the name of the present, the present. Now we are in the present. We don't know what will happen after that. And because of the war, people are in Berlin now. So this is the moment of present that people come here, and for example, they can't speak Arabic because they come newly they are new in Berlin, so we offer the Arabic language. And the second thing, it's our guides are also migrants. So our guides, they are here from 3 years or 1 year or some months, and they are very academic background. Our guides, it's able to be a mediator for culture, and it's not about hierarchy. It's not about we are the European, give you some. No, it's not about like that. It's about human. It's about the human part of us. Like we are people. We speak, for you in your language, and you can come. You can express. The most important thing, what's happened, it's the dialogue. The visit or the tour, it's consists on or based on dialogue, and
dialogue between
the guide and the visitors.
Okay.
And of course the object.
Right.
So the object, it's the object, it's the story. And the visitors and the guide, it's just like a mediator who give question, and we let people talk. So in Museum for Islamic Art, for example, we have a very monumental, famous object. It's the room of Aleppo, and this room. It's one of the oldest room from in Syria, and this is with the wood. And it's very decorative it's very luxurious. And this room, it's from the 17th century. And a lot of visitors from Aleppo come into this room and they speak to us about this room and about their experience in this kind of houses.
To what extent does this dialogue bleed into contemporary affairs? I mean, politics. I mean, to what extent is it around the objects, or does it become a kind of larger conversation reflecting on the daily situation in politics and in Berlin as well?
Yeah. And I think as a guide, we speak less. We just give questions and some infos about dates and a little bit of history, and our goal just to make people speak. And as Adrian says also, that we learn from visitors, we learn from them, because everyone who comes to the museum, I think to come to a museum, it's not obligation. It's not an obligation. If you want to visit a museum, you go for you because you want to see something, because you want to learn. So we just want to learn, to hear what they have, what experience they have.
How have your German colleagues, the curators, of the museums, how have they responded to this? Has this been controversial? How has it been received?
So they are surprised about the huge number who come to the museum.
How many people come?
Yeah, a lot of people come. Just till now, we are in the 6th month, and we have quasi 4,000 people or visitors who come to visit the museum. Wow. And this is a huge number, because normally in the visit you have maximum between 15 and 20 people. Sometimes we had 90 people in one tour, and this is a huge number for that. For this reason, we started with one visit per week, and then in February we make 2 visits per week. In 4 museums.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to what other things museums are doing, but I mean, it's just one of many. I mean, in fact, there are a lot of these little initiatives cropping up, and they turn out to be surprisingly popular and hopefully are having an impact on the institution. Maya, I'd like to come to you. You are also an expat, but instead of moving to Europe, because you're Syrian, you moved to the US on a Fulbright in 2012, so just after. Not long after Razan moved to Europe, and involved in this organization that is an expatriate-based organization that is helping Syria and the Syrian community through various activities, which you can talk about very briefly. Before, you already worked on a kind of scholarship program that was helping people integrate. Now, of course, in the US, we haven't really felt the immigrant crisis that Europe is feeling, because the United States has been extremely limited in opening its doors to the current wave of immigration. On the other hand, the US has had a much bigger history already of integrating people from outside American borders. So talk a little bit about your experience and how you see what cultural institutions can do in this context.
Thank you, András.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be here because I've been involved for a long time in the cultural world, running a nonprofit in Syria, working in the community arts field, both in Syria and the US. And recently, I've joined a Syrian expatriate-based organization that I run. It's called Jusoor, which means bridges. We help Syrians, mainly children and youth around the world, continue their education through higher education scholarships, 3 schools for remedial education in Lebanon, supporting entrepreneurs and doing academic mentorship. Our involvement as an organization with the arts has been one where we found arts to have the power to connect, to integrate, and to foster healing. With this mainly educational organization, we've involved in the arts first. We do annual fundraising events, and these involve art auctions, where Syrian artists get engaged and help us connect in a different way to our audiences. And this also helps us highlight these brilliant creative people as a different face of the crisis. And we have started doing this, building on a strength that we had through connections and connections to artists and art galleries. And over now 4 years, found it to be extremely successful and are continuing to do it. In our 3 schools for refugee children in Lebanon, we have integrated in our curriculum components about Syria's culture, heritage, history, and geography, because we found that the experience in that specific context, the students may be living in urban areas or in camps, and some of them have been even born in Lebanon or grew up for the majority of their lives away from their homes, and we found that there is a missing component in their identity development, that this inclusion of culture and heritage related to their homeland was very important in their healthy identity development, if we were to say. We also partner with an art therapy group that allows the children to express their stories and share their feelings in a language that's different from spoken or written words, which may be also limited for this age group, which we also found very, very useful. I'd like to add that as a cultural actor, I've been personally involved with work with a fantastic organization called the Philadelphia Folklore Project, where I live right now. And a few years ago, I did a consultancy with them, and my task was to work with recently resettled refugees in Philadelphia, coming from Burma, Nepal, and Iraq. The mission was to find traditional artists, find out what arts are important for these communities, and recommend ways to help them sustain these arts. And in that investigation, I found 5 Iraqi poets a Burmese weaver, many Nepalese musicians, and developed a theme and groundwork for an exhibit that focuses on the traditions related to birth and growing up in the Nepalese culture, which was very important to that community. And although the mission was really to know the neighbors of the cultural organization that I was representing in order to do programming and work with these communities, I think that investigation exercise was an end by itself, because in that experience I moved from hanging out at the ethnic food store to meet people, to having people who figured out what I was there for take me on the street by the hand to their homes to show me their culture, to show me what they've done, to share music. And I could feel they were happy. I mean, in the cases of Nepalese and Burmese refugees, we didn't even speak, there were language difficulties, but we connected. And in some other cases, it was harder. Although I spoke Arabic, it was so hard to find the first thread in the Iraqi community. It took me a month to find the first thread. They lived far away from each other in the city, but the patience was worth it, because that power of connection and finding artists and engaging around art.
I think what you're saying is it's an important reminder that in terms of this artistic or cultural response, we really have a kind of full spectrum from the elite museums all the way down to the community, I shouldn't say all the way across to the community-based responses. And I think the other thing that what you say really underlines is that when we talk about migrants, immigrants, refugees, whatever words you want to use, usually the frame around these people is economic, and the organizations involved tend to focus on health and housing and economic integration. But what you remind of is that for these people, there's an equal urgency to claiming their heritage, to their identity, and that's a huge part of this process. So we'll get back to that, but I want to get to Paul, who's been quietly, silently waiting to speak. And he's with Modern Art Oxford since 2013. This is a 50-year-old organization really known for its strong and vital work in engaging local community audiences. And you've been in the art world for 20 years in different roles, from Serpentine Gallery to the Royal Academy to art galleries, and you studied aesthetics and visual theory, but here you are at this organization. There are many things I could ask you, but I think my biggest question to you is engaging with this a matter of choice for art organizations like the one you lead?
Well, it is, but I personally think that institutions have a real responsibility to reflect contemporary conditions. And I think that there are fewer, I can't think of anything else actually that's more defining of our era at the moment than this appalling crisis that's happening. And of course, artists are responding to that. And institutions are, I think, following the eyes and the ears of artists. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important. Having said that, I don't think it's always easy for institutions to respond. They lack the skills, increasingly the resources. Some perhaps don't consider themselves to have a mandate or a responsibility, might have ethical issues around what the limitations of art are precisely. And I think that's a really interesting observation that Adrian was making earlier about what can art do. So in the case of an institution, it's my own view, and I feel humbled listening to other panelists about the depth of their work, which I can't claim for us to be making at Oxford, but I think that institutions with their programs can provide really important meeting places through their displays. They can create forms of insight and empathy and compassion and a discourse around really complicated scenarios. Further to that, they can offer forms of volunteering and training. They can contribute to forms of well-being and of integration as public spaces. So I personally feel that it's really important that institutions do what they can but they do so responsibly and recognize that this is really very expert work that requires long-term approaches and working with the right sorts of partnerships, which we're looking at in Oxford.
Can you give an example of something that you're doing specifically?
Well, it's mostly through the formulation of our partnership strategy, who we're working with in Oxford. There are a number of agencies in Oxford that work with refugees. At Oxford University, you have one of the world's leading centres, the Refugee Study Centre, that produces research and advocacy and knowledge and organises seminars and conferences and displays. So we have a volunteering program that we're actively working with refugees in the city. So I think there are lots of things that institutions can, and I really do think should do, but they need to recognise that their real responsibilities to working with these groups of people who are the most disadvantaged, most vulnerable people, and on a level of trying to relate, even with the bridge of art, trying to relate to the experiences of people that have been in these situations is very difficult, I think, for institutional structures to try to comprehend.
Adrian was saying earlier that some of this is about changing the sort of power relation or relationship to the audience, and that there's a kind of we said that there's a kind of unlearning that needs to happen. What is it that institutions need to unlearn to be able to engage this audience?
Well, I think most institutions already have expertise in education, in outreach work. They recognise the value of more porous approaches to programming. We're all working in a world of participation and of performance, and so I think those traditional hierarchies that were very structured and firm before, I think are more fluid now in any case in most institutions, and they provide opportunities, I think, for institutions to keep learning from the work that they're doing in precisely the way that Razan and Maya were talking about. So we have a culture at Modern Art Oxford of being a hearing organisation. We recognise that we have a paradigm and an ideology, but it isn't always the right framework for achieving the things that we want to. But it's a constant project. I mean, this is, as Adrian was saying, there's no end to this thing. It's something that we can't think of this as a project per se. It's something that's ongoing.
So lots of themes on the table, and we have limited time, but I just want to come back to some of the things that have already bubbled up to the surface. And I want to come back first to the sort of the artistic response and how you all see the artistic responses that you've seen. You're all people who keep your eyes open. Without fascism, there would be no Guernica. There's a relationship between societal strain and new ways of seeing and new ways of making art. You were talking, Adrian, about how this experience opens up new spaces or points to certain areas of inquiry for artists. As you look out on the landscape, anyone can speak. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you find have been particularly astute responses from artists or exhibitions or artists that you've seen that are references for how you can respond to this situation? Anyone?
Well, I think there are many examples of artists that are working with these experiences, and I think that it's difficult to answer that question sort of en masse, really. But I think what art offers is a space for reflection, precisely, that is very amplified, and it's away from the forms of information or insight that we're getting that are highly spectacular or sensationalized through the media, and I think that's a really important mandate, and I think artists respond to that. I mean, there are really so many specific examples, ranging from, as I think you were talking earlier about the artist here, in the context of an art fair at Art Basel, where you have an artist who has taken the imprints of clothes that have been left and shed by refugees arriving from the Mediterranean, and then using those to create artworks that are framed in the birchwood from, but I think it's always it's dangerous territory, though, because there can be something slighting or potentially trivializing around the commodification also of these types of products within the art market, even when they are being reinvested back into very charitable projects. It's potentially controversial, I think.
Yes, and there also tends to be a bit of a lag, really, in how the art world responds. This is not the news media where there's an event that happens yesterday and tomorrow you see an image in the newspaper. There has to be a kind of processing to some extent.
Our experience has been more with artists who have been immigrants or refugees themselves, mainly interacting with them through the art auctions or supporting students to continue their education. And I'm not going to speak in their voice, just observing that they've continued their work to produce and express. The art is the language they use to communicate and express their experiences. And we have seen that a lot of the work communicates feelings about what is happening in their lives. It is an experience of maybe growth or yeah.
But what is the right kind of response? I mean, Ai Weiwei has made this topic a central feature of his practice. When he did this work of sort of recreating, restaging in a sense, this young child on the beach in Turkey, some people saw that as a very powerful way of spotlighting the issue. Others saw it as a very exploitative act. You used the word sensitivity. Adrian, you used the word sensationalism. How do you walk that line? How do you make sure that the work doesn't become exploitative of the subject matter?
Well, of course, I mean, it's a very delicate issue, because you can start with all the good intentions, but then you enter in a process that you cannot control somehow. And when you think that you are the superstar, that you have all the spots on you and you can do something just to give visibility to a question, or I mean, I think you start with in a wrong way. So that's why I started saying what art cannot do. So it's a kind of exercise of modesty. And I mean, you mentioned Ai Weiwei. I don't like, for example, that project or that
because of its
gesture.
lack of modesty, as you would call it.
Yeah, I think it's yeah. I mean, I'm not going now to talk about it, but yeah, just because I think it's something not needed, just to go there and to play the little child. Yeah, I think you asked before about some works, and I was trying to think. Of course, there are many, as Paul said. For example, now is Tanya Bruguera. She is involved in creating a movement of migrants, So it's a kind of party. So I like the fact that when artists get out of it's also of its own practice or its own language or its own territory to enter in another territory and to try an experience where somehow she's also questioning herself as an artist. But talking about maybe something that is more into the poetry of art expression. I have in mind this video of Maya Bajevic, for example, when its title is Green, Green Grass of Home. And when she's in this empty field, filmed from far away, describing her home to her boyfriend in every detail, like walking in this empty field and like saying that here was a window, and when I was young, I remember that I was watching from this window this thing, and here was this room where it was his bed. So she is describing every detail in this empty field. So somehow it's bringing this experience of memory or missing somehow a reality that is very intimate to her, but underlining also the emptiness, the gap or this void somehow. So just to mention two works that I really like, but of course there are other works. But yeah, I think it should be very I mean, the intervention of the artist in this case should be very, very delicate and able to problematize its own position, not thinking that I am in the position that I have a voice and I want to use it, because somehow, I mean, having a voice means that you are inside a system that somehow is also responsible for the conditions of these people. So somehow you have to make an exercise of self-critique.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you actually, the people who come on your tours and you have these deep discussions and engagements with them, most of that is in the context of their historic heritage. But do you get a sense that they're also going to contemporary art galleries and engaging with this subject through contemporary art, or is it not the case?
I think the first step to come to the museum, it's that you have the idea in your head that you want to discover the cultural scene in Berlin. Mm-hmm. So with this idea, I think people ask us after the tour if we have another museum or if we know art institution, and some people are very interested to make always this as a ritual. Like
so they're looking to institutions to help them.
And then I think a lot of them, they want to also to participate in something. I think here the museum, it's as a place. He opened the door and he opened all the possibility to let people interact with objects. So this interaction is very important because this interaction make these stories, and we recognize after each tours we make feedback, and with these feedbacks a lot of people, they told us we want to do something, we want to participate more, we want to, I don't know what.
Participate in what?
They told us we don't know, but we want to be like here in this place, we want to do more. And for this reason we create workshops in for museum, but with Arabic speaker, with German speakers. So this dialogue, this workshop is intercultural workshop, and we're working with each workshop with an artist, and for example with blowing glass, with photographers, with designers, with all type of art, and a lot of artists. And people can interact between them, like in Arabic, German, and they make something for them, like with the relation with object for the museum. I think people need art and culture. And also now the migration of refugees, I don't like this word, but also the new commander, I call it. They need commander. Newcomers.
Okay,
yeah, sorry. Yep. So, newcomers, not in German. So they are always in the time to make papers, bureaucracy, looking for all this process, and they need in their life also this kind of culture and artistic scene, because they are a migration or refugees because of the war and not because of economic or another causes. So they are very, very, very different, with different background, with different. They are academica. They are like young people who studies, children, families. It's all people come. So it's also it's very important to be sensitive, as you like, with this question, and not to make it it's like from Syrian to Syrian people, and not like how we can say hierarchies or hierarchies.
Let me just do a quick check on the room. Who has questions so that I know? There will be a couple. Okay, I'll make sure to. Okay, so one of the things that's emerging in this conversation clearly is that institutions have a role to play. But how do you go from how should I say, a few scattered sort of feel-good projects to something that is able to address this gigantic issue on a scale. And to what extent can museums or the art world institutions be a major player in this, this equation, given their extreme limitations on resources? Can we really make a difference?
I think that's the question, isn't it? But I think that institutions are really influential. They make culture with artists, with audiences, and with other participants. And I think collectively, they have a great deal of power. So there's more that can be done. But of course, most institutions across the world are also finding that they've got their own challenges, their own pressures on their resources, and so. And there is an increasing, in some cases, an increasing privatization, you might say, of public institutions, which is not always wanting to be focusing on some of these issues.
Right. I mean, you're really talking about a refocusing of either the government funding approach that says, okay, now we would like you to address these issues, here's funding, or the philanthropic community has to see the purposes of art institutions differently. So it would require a kind of change of mentality among foundations and private donors, wouldn't it? To some extent?
I mean, just finally, I would say that I don't think that the issue is, as I think we've all recognized, one of awareness. I think you really do have to be living under a rock not to know that this crisis is happening. I think the question for all of us, and this is a wider question, is what can we individually do? What are our responsibilities in the face of this? And it's a much wider question than really that could be posed by art or by institutions. It's really a question of our humanity, I think. But I think many of us struggle to feel that we have the agency in our democracies necessarily to directly benefit the most disadvantaged people en masse that we've ever seen since the Second World War. So I think it's hugely complicated, but I think the issue is not about awareness. It really is about personal responsibility, I feel.
And I'd like to argue that a lot of smaller efforts, but also smaller and larger efforts are already happening. And I think one very important step is for us to document our work and for our institutions to write about their experiences and what has worked, what has not worked. I've been looking at arts-based youth empowerment programs for the past 3 years, and even for a topic that's not specifically related to immigrants, but to to groups that need help or may benefit from extra support and engagement. You'd be surprised how little documentation there is, even when there is. I'm going to give you an example. So even when people document a project, so for instance, someone may say, we worked with this group for 3 months. And as an actor, if I'm looking at repeating what they've done, or looking what has worked on what hasn't, maybe they said for 3 months, but I don't know, have they worked for 5 hours with a group within the 3 months or 50 hours? So it's very important to document and to publish and communicate about our work. And to also reflect on your question about engaging foundations, and I think it's a two-way street. And have been fortunate to experience firsthand through my work in the educational kind of organization that works specifically with refugees. I've experienced that there is great goodwill around the world, and so many people who are interested and want to be engaged and want to give, but also that there's a huge gap between that goodwill and that materializing into actual services or students on campus, if it's academic scholarships, etc. And that we, as cultural actors, have a responsibility of advocacy, of creating the great work and then going and talking about it to the foundations and getting support.
Let's take a couple of questions. And if you, there's a lady sort of over here. There's a microphone. Is there a microphone? Yes, could you bring it up here, please? Am I right? Yeah. And if you won't mind sharing who you are, or if you're with an organization, please do.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. I'm Victoria, and I work for Al Sirkal Avenue. I've been in the Middle East for about 9 years, and I go to refugee camps to help kids develop through art. And part of what you said, Razan and Maya, is that people want to help and there's goodwill. I'm just wondering if, like, it was very much an initiative on my own to go and do it, and I would have loved to have an institution perhaps helping me through the process of what you said, documentation. There is no documentation. You can put loads of stuff on Facebook, but when it comes to actual activism, and I was wondering, is this something that could happen, that institution go beyond awareness of what you said, and go into activism, taking communities that are not touched by the issue and go there themselves to work through that? Is it something that institution could perhaps do, is encourage activism?
Maya?
We have had a very successful experience now for 2 years. We ran a summer volunteer program in our 3 schools in Lebanon. We open it to participants mostly coming from North America and Europe who help at our schools, and we in the summer where our teachers get a little bit of a break, but they also continue to help, and we structure it for them. And we have, we ask the participants after they finish the program of the impact it has had on them. And this is something that we have found to be very, very profound and to have impacted the continuous engagement of these individuals and their communities beyond them when they go back to where they were, where they're based permanently. And I encourage other people and organizations to involve in volunteer programs like that.
Razan, can you imagine your program sort of going beyond the walls of the museum, kind of actually going out? Or have you heard of similar programs?
I think we just like with our workshops concept, it's like growing up. Like it's not just make tour into a place or into a museum. Maybe it would be more like interactive with the city or with the art scene in the city or cultural heritage culture scene in the city itself. And I think a lot of German people are very interested also about the Syrian culture, because they recognize that Syrian people are very like different and with different religions and not like Arabic, typical Arabic or stereotype Arabic people, because like Syria, it's very, very mixed. A lot of religion minorities, and they are very curious to get to know more about the Syrian culture. So a lot of Germans come to the tours and they make a tour in Arabic, even that they didn't understand any word, but they want to just participate to get to learn the other culture. And I found that's very important when we are like migration in one country, that not just we want to learn more about. Of course, this is very important because we want to learn the language and get to know the history of the new country. But also, it would be more effective, more real. Like when also the people want to or have the curiosity to get to learn Arabic, to get to learn more about the Syrian culture, because Syria, it's different from Egypt, it's different from Tunisia, it's different from Saudi Arabia. So this is also, I think, to do an integration in one country, this point is very important.
There was a question over here, I think, with Susan.
Yes, Adrian, I wondered if you'd seen, I thought it was a beautiful installation in the lobby of the Museum of Modern Art. I hate to mangle his name. Bukra Khalili. It's a kind of mapping project. I wondered what you thought of it.
He hasn't been there recently.
In New York, okay.
Okay, there's a question right in the rear. And then there's a gentleman here, and there's going to be someone here.
First of all, thank you very much for the conversation today. I found it fascinating. My name is Christina. I work with the Migrant Offshore Aid Station. And I'm here today actually as a guest of Alfredo Gia. We're the recipient charity for the project The Gift that's taking place on Paco. We work in maritime search and rescue, which is a humanitarian response to deaths at sea. So we're an organization that works within migration, but not on a cultural level necessarily. We work very much on a technical level. And Alfredo has been working with us on this project. He's managed to bridge this gap between creating something that is thought-provoking and includes the art culture, but also is directly beneficial to the organization. And for us, that's extremely refreshing because we found it very difficult. We've had a lot of interest from the art world that are exploring the issues that we work with on a daily basis, but no one is always sure about how to make the projects that are thought-provoking also have a real impact on the work that we do. So although we're happy to share information, that information doesn't always result in a change in our programming. So I guess my question is, do you guys have any advice for organizations like ours that work within migration, that do the groundwork but aren't necessarily involved in any cultural programming to bridge that gap? How can we make use of the art that is being created in that environment to have a real impact on the work that we do, the way that we have this time managed to bridge that gap with Alfredo. But it's very difficult sometimes for us to know when an artist approaches us how to use that work. What do we do with it? How do we change it into something substantial that we can then use to forward our work?
Anyone?
I think you make a really good point, and your organisation sounds amazing. I think András earlier was talking about the things that institutions need to learn. I know you're talking about artists, but I think institutions need to learn how to work through these partnerships, which are probably quite new for institutions. Although they work with very different types of agencies often that are beyond, say, school groups or older people or people with dementia, or, this is a really very particular field of practice. So I think it's going to come out of more practice. And I do think that long-term partnerships where there's a real synergy and a symbiosis between organizations such as yours and a cultural institution will create new forms of projects and new modes of engagement for audiences that will be influential. But I think we're still all quite green, I think, in that. And I think this is a common problem, and I think you've made a really excellent point.
Maybe on a practical level, if I may jump in, if you found one organization that you could have a close collaboration with, it might be easier than just coming with new projects to organizations you don't know. You were going to say?
No, I'm always with the idea to make intercultural dialogue. When you have a lot of nationality together, it's very important to sit people together and to interact between them, and you will find a lot of subject they are common subject between a lot of culture, and you can make that will be active also to listen directly from the people what they want and what they can do.
I'd like to build on András's point of maybe focusing on one key partnership. We have found that the more the more successful we became, the more partnership requests we started receiving, really more than our capacity to handle. And what we have found very useful is to assess. It's to go purposefully into each partnership rather than saying yes at the upfront and we want to help, and to assess after each one what has worked for us, what hasn't worked, what has potentially worked for them, and then you also have more information to communicate to the new partners of what you're looking for and what could be most useful.
One more here and then one last one over there. So Corinne.
Hi, thank you. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm an independent curator. And recently I built up a project at the new museum called Idea City, and it was about artists exploring ways of changing the urban space. And besides working with a lot of local arts organizations and artists, what I found particularly fruitful was involving artists in conversations with policymakers or people from politics, and very specifically bringing together different voices. And I mean, all the work that you do sounds amazing, and I've been wondering if any of your institution has been thinking about being a platform of bringing together, also politics with artists, because artists have a different way of thinking, and that can be incredibly useful to politicians, to policymakers, because they would never sit together with an artist, or let's say with an immigrant, a refugee. So I think bringing these people actually into one room can be incredibly useful. So I was just wondering if any of you has been thinking about that.
Any reflection on that, other than it would be a good idea?
It sounds like a great idea. I think for Modern Art Oxford, we're very aware as a public institution to stay politically kind of open. And so there's some anxiety sometimes about having very political conversations. I mean, party political or policy conversations. But I do think it's, I personally think it's a useful thing to do.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Friedrich von Bose. I'm a cultural anthropologist based in Basel. And thanks first to all of you for your insights. And I think it's really interesting and yeah, it's really great to see how much migration as a topic and both as an experience affects your work and your institutions. And I was kind of struggling the whole time with how can we attend to the vocabulary we are using when talking about migration and its effect on the art world. And I found it a little peculiar how migration is on the one hand at the core of your work, and at the same time we here and in many other contexts as well talk about us as them as the migrants and us as, the kind of the non-migrants. And I was wondering when, looking at the terminology we are using, Razan, you said, and I very much agree, you have a problem with the term refugee. And in German you have this, this new notion of Geflüchtete, where it's more about the verb, more about the experience than about the subject position. And I think these little instances could be important also for the work within the art world to kind of ask for ways to create shifts in this representational paradigm of migration versus non-migration, of refugees versus us, of migrants versus us. And I was just wondering, is it so fruitful to talk about the migration crisis, for example, or should we rather consider ways of talking about these issues, making migration, kind of showing that this has been a historical normality, much more so than an exception. So I was wondering how you think about this also in terms of your own practice, but also in terms of how can we, create those spaces. Paul, you said create spaces of reflection. Also, and I would say yes, definitely, but also create spaces of reflection about how we can kind of intervene in this representational paradigm. Thank you very much.
I just want to respond from my engagement in this project. How I say that. I think after working with Inform Museum in Berlin for 6 months, I learned that culture heritage it's belong to the whole humanity. It's not belong one country, or one just nationality. And when you get to know more about history and culture, you can see that also art and artifact and culture heritage was a migration. It was migrated between several countries, several civilizations, like people. And when these people come to the museum, we can see that also people are not like are very mixed. And when we get to know more about history and culture, at the end we can say that we are all migration.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap it up, but there will be one last question. I think, as we probably could have guessed, we sort of went a little bit all over the map because the subject is so broad, because it encompasses everything from the content of artistic creation all the way to institutional response, and even within institutional response, the entire spectrum of community-based integration efforts, educational efforts, which are really quite far away from the world of Art Basel and big museums, all the way up to the greatest museums in the world and how they're responding. So this is a very large field to fill. In response, perhaps to the last comment, certainly one of the things that resonated in here is that one contribution artists can make is to bring nuance and empathy into the discourse surrounding this incredibly complicated issue, helping us come up with the right concepts, the right words, the right responses, the right frames through which to both observe and to participate in this situation. Last question to the esteemed panel. There are a lot of very well-to-do people here at Art Basel, and maybe someone from the audience here today or seeing the panel discussion on video decides to endow a major artistic initiative that directly addresses the migrant crisis, or however, whatever words the gentleman would like to use. And this person is willing to spend serious amount of money, but they want to work through art or an art institution, and they would like to put this institution and these artists in the service of somehow addressing this crisis. They want to start quickly, and they would like to have impact. What advice would you give them? And I'm going to start with Maya.
I would focus on partnering with as many community-based organizations as possible and helping them connect with, so I would advise them to connect to partner with these organizations and help and support them with resources to enable them to connect to their new neighbors and help these new neighbors also identify what's important to them and communicate it back, and kind of investment in communication and exchange.
Adrian.
Yeah, I was thinking I don't have any advice actually. I just say give this help, and maybe do not expect any quick impact, because I think that these are really deep questions that touch the deepest part of humanity. So also the impact we should wait for. Generosity is always a good thing to know. So.
Paul.
All I can say is that I think it should be something that's entirely socially engaged and with an artist who's working through forms of activism that really do make a difference. So I think there's some interesting models, people like Theaster Gates, who uses his resources to reinvest in community projects, or people like Tanya Bruguera that Adrian talked about earlier, that are interested in activism to both reveal and also to make change. So I think it should be an award that specifically, if any of you are thinking about doing this, it should be an award that really specifically fuels that type of practice, but is measured by its social impact.
Finally, perhaps fittingly, Razan, the last word is yours. What would you advise?
I think it's important that this project worked more and more and more, and also maybe to get to have an audio guide in Arabic for in the museums, because it's not now it's not accessible, and I think it's very important for people to keep in touch with art and culture institution always. So how we if this kind of project works always, that will change the image also of the newcomers.
Yeah. All right, well, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank all of you for taking time on this, and I think there's a lot of lessons. There's a lot we can all do, both as the art world at large and as individuals, to addressing this issue, which is certainly here to stay for the foreseeable future. So thanks very much for all your thoughts. Enjoy the show.